Throughout history, there have been people who have committed some of the most heinous crimes fathomable. For those crimes, they have been convicted and sentenced to death. Welcome to Death Row Executions, where we take a look into the lives of society's worst offenders. And now, your host, Air.
Hello everyone, today's story is on Gilbert Ray Postelle, who was born in 1986 and was executed this year in the state of Oklahoma. At 19 years old, Gilbert was already addicted to meth and had nothing going for himself. He would often ponder about his father Brad Postelle and his recent motorcycle accident that left him permanently physically and mentally impaired. It was Memorial Day in 2005 when Gilbert invited some of his friends over to his house. Crystal Ballman, Arthur Wilder, Alvis Sanders, and Randall Bias were all hanging out at Gilbert's house, and they were all partaking in smoking meth in Gilbert's smoke room. Gilbert's brother David came into the room, and they began discussing how they thought a man named Donnie Swindle was responsible for their father's accident. Everyone in the smoke room heard Gilbert say that whoever was responsible for his father's current condition was going to pay. With anger in their hearts and on their minds, the group of friends went outside for target shooting. Arthur Wilder already had intentions of shooting around with Gilbert and David Postelle, so he brought his newly acquired Mac-90 rifle. Gilbert had an SKS rifle, but he was out of ammo, so he, Arthur, and Crystal went to another friend's house in Del City in order to get some. That friend gave Gilbert a speed loader for the Mac-90 rifle and a bag of bullets for the Mac-90 and the SKS rifle. They made it back to Gilbert's house, and after some time shooting, Gilbert, his brother David, his father Brad, Crystal, Arthur, and Randall hopped in Gilbert's maroon Dodge minivan. Crystal and Arthur were dropped off at David's house. Although Crystal denied knowing of Gilbert's plans, Arthur knew Gilbert's intentions were to find Donnie Swindle and kill him. He did not go to authorities because he did not know if Gilbert would actually follow through with his threats. Even though he didn't go to authorities, he did feel uncomfortable, and instead of staying at David's house, he requested to be taken to Crystal's house instead. The remaining people in Gilbert's vehicle left to Donnie's house. A few hours later, David Postelle returned Arthur's Mac-90. David left, and then Arthur and Crystal decided to hide the rifle in Arthur's storage unit. Arthur found out from a friend that there were murders in the area, and Arthur hid the gun because he assumed David and Gilbert were the culprits. Arthur had not spoken with the Postelle brothers and did not know for sure if they went through with their plans, but that changed when he turned on the local news. As he was watching the news, he saw surveillance video of Gilbert's minivan leave Donnie's property. On the news segment, they mentioned multiple homicide, so in that moment, Arthur knew what happened and who did it. Arthur kept the information to himself though, and he did not see Gilbert until a couple of days after the murders. Gilbert told Arthur everything that happened, and he noticed Crystal was close by and was able to hear everything that was being said, so he instructed her to stay quiet. Gilbert went on to say that on Memorial Day, after Crystal and Arthur were dropped off, he and the other passengers in his minivan, David, Brad, and Randall Bias, went to the property of Donnie Swindle. Inside Donnie's trailer was Donnie himself, Terry Smith, Amy Wright, and James Alderson. Gilbert and another person entered Donnie's trailer. One went through the front door and another went through the back. Brad stayed in the car. Gilbert bragged about how he chased the victims out of the trailer and forced them to get down on their knees with their backs facing him. Gilbert then shot 30 rounds into the victims with an AK-47 before it jammed, and he reloaded to shoot them even more. David then approached Donnie and shot him 6 times with the SKS rifle. There were multiple witnesses who heard gunshots and saw Gilbert driving off. Some witnesses even noticed that Gilbert was laughing as he was driving away. The surveillance video was able to capture the car, but the images of the occupants were not clear. 2 witnesses left the area and went down the street to an officer on traffic duty. Oklahoma City police officer Rocky Gregory was told that there were gunshots nearby, so he and his partner left their station to investigate. They made it to Donnie's property, and they saw Donnie, Amy, Terry, and James dead. They all died from gunshot wounds and were shot from behind. A woman by the name of Sandra Frame worked at the bar right next to where the victims were shot. When she heard the gunshots, she left the bar and noticed the minivan driving off. She was able to get a good look at the driver and of the other men in the car. At a later date, she was shown a photographic lineup and she told detectives that she was 85% sure that the person she picked was the passenger of the minivan. That person was none other than David Postelle. Police received a call from an anonymous informant. The informant told police that he was at Patsy Postelle's house on May 30th early in the afternoon. Patsy was Gilbert's mother, and in her home that day was Gilbert, David, Brad, Arthur, and Randall. They were all using drugs, and all of a sudden, Brad, Gilbert, and David began to discuss how they thought Donnie was responsible for Brad's motorcycle accident in 2004. They came up with the idea of scaring Donnie with an AK-47. The informant said that soon after their discussion, Gilbert, David, Brad, and Randall left to Donnie's trailer. The informant gave details of the crime, and he also led investigators to the weapons that were hidden in a storage unit. Oklahoma City Police Officer Felicia Williams was able to speak with Gilbert, and she made it known to the public that Gilbert agreed to surrender to Midwest City Police. Hours later, Gilbert followed through on his word and surrendered to police without incident, and he was taken to an Oklahoma County jail. Following Gilbert's arrest, Gilbert's father Brad, his brother David, and his cousin were arrested on murder conspiracy charges. Alvis Earl Sanders and Arthur Wilder were arrested as well on charges of being accessories to murder. When trial began, the court was made aware of the fact that Gilbert had at least 8 previous arrests on drug manufacturing and weapons charges. Gilbert tried to argue that he had been binging on meth and he was not in his right frame of mind. Defense attorneys presented an argument claiming that Gilbert suffered from learning disabilities and his meth use began at a very early age after his mother abandoned him. A man named Jay Sanders testified that a couple of days after the murders, David and Gilbert began to throw around ideas on how they would get rid of the minivan since the van was on the news. They agreed that Jay and another man named Daniel would drive the car to Indiana, set it on fire, and put it in a lake. Jay agreed, and after cleaning the car out as best as he could, he drove the minivan to Indiana to a house that belonged to a relative of Gilbert's. Jay also helped with removing drug paraphernalia from Gilbert's house, and he was put in charge of hiding the minivan license plate and gun parts. The prosecution relied on testimonies from people close to Gilbert, and they said he bragged about the murders. He bragged about how the victims tried to escape, but he was able to complete his task by shooting them. After killing them, he got closer to their dead bodies and shot them in the head multiple times. He was proud of the fact that the victims were begging for their lives, and it was noted that he showed a lack of remorse. In terms of everyone who was involved, these were their charges and sentences. Crystal was offered immunity in exchange for her full cooperation with the state. Arthur was charged with accessory after the fact, unlawful possession of a firearm, concealing stolen property, and possession of a sawed-off shotgun. In quoting a court document, Arthur entered a blind plea and was sentenced to 180 years imprisonment, subject to 1-year judicial review. On judicial review, Arthur agreed to testify, and his sentence was vacated by a judge. The judge agreed to entertain a new recommendation following the trials related to this matter. Arthur signed an agreement to cooperate and testified truthfully that provided he would be allowed to withdraw his original plea and re-enter a new plea of nolo contendory to the previous charges, plus some drug charges, and receive 5 years on each count to be served concurrently and with credit for time served. Nolo contendory is a plea by which a defendant in a criminal prosecution accepts conviction as though a guilty plea had been entered but does not admit guilt. Alvis entered a guilty plea to accessory after the fact to the offense of first-degree murder because of his involvement in disposing of evidence. Because of his truthful testimony, the state recommended he be given a 12-year split sentence per his plea agreement of 6 years imprisonment with the remaining 6 years suspended. Randall was initially charged with the same exact charges as Gilbert, 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. He pled guilty to accessory to a felony of first-degree murder. In exchange for his testimony, the state recommended a split sentence of 6 years imprisonment with the remaining 14 years suspended. As for Gilbert, in 2008, he was found guilty and he was sentenced to death. Over the years, there were appeals that were all denied, and Gilbert took part in an interview where he said, "I do understand that I'm guilty, and I accept that. There's nothing more that I know to say to you all than I'm truly sorry for what I've done to all these families." Despite saying these words, one point of his appeal was that the victim impact statements should have been dismissed. He claimed that the statements were unduly emotional and improperly characterized the crimes at issue. John Alderson, brother of victim James, gave an impact statement during trial and spoke of how James cared for their elderly mother, and he described how his family wasn't even able to look at him after his death. Amy Wright's mother also gave an impact statement, and she mentioned how she was distraught knowing that her daughter was chased from her home and shot in the back. She was quoted saying, "It's an unthinkable nightmare from which my family and I will never wake." She spoke of Amy's life, interests, personality, and more. She also mentioned how she herself was still struggling and started therapy and taking medication. The appeal response was that the emotional content of the two victim impact statements were concise and narrowly focused on the permissible subjects and was within the bounds of admissible victim impact testimony. They said that not only was the testimony about the victim and the victim's family permissible, but the 10th Circuit has frequently held that even highly emotional victim evidence did not render trials unfair. One of Gilbert's last points on an appeal was his mental retardation. He felt that his death sentence should have been reversed because he was considered mentally retarded. On September 2, 2016, District Judge Stephen Friott denied Gilbert's appeal. They mentioned that he had not shown good cause for discovery and that an evidentiary hearing was unwarranted, so requests for discovery and evidentiary hearings were denied. While on death row, his death warrant was signed for February 17, 2022. In December 2021, he tried getting a stay of execution, stating that the lethal injection was unconstitutional and he wanted to be executed by firing squad instead, but his stay was denied. Gilbert got engaged while on death row to a woman named Jackie Thompson, and he also had a daughter by the name of Kaylee Johnson, who he had with his ex-wife Jenny. Kaylee was quoted saying, "My dad is my inspiration. He keeps me going. He calls me his beautiful daughter and says he's proud of me. I don't want to lose my dad." Gilbert was set to die, and he had a last meal of 20 chicken nuggets with ranch, barbecue, and honey mustard sauce, 3 large ketchup-flavored fries, a crispy chicken sandwich, 1 regular chicken sandwich, a large cola, and 1 caramel frappuccino. He died a little after 10 a.m., and before his execution, he was asked if he had any last words, and he replied by saying no. Thank you all for watching another episode of Death Row Executions. Let me know what you guys think of this story in the comments below. Thank you to all my patrons, and thank you to all my YouTube members. If you have time, please check out my website, deathrowexecutions.net.